In the movie, the Austin timeline is kind of the shittier timeline, so I guess I'm stuck in the shitty timeline. Currently in my living in Austin shitty timeline era. Hello and welcome back to the Miscellaneous channel. We do miscellaneous things. I'm Zeleny. I typically cover TV, pop culture, internet trends, and other miscellaneous things on this channel, so subscribe if that's your vibe. Today I wanted to review Look Both Ways, especially as an Austinite. Half of this movie takes place in Austin, Texas, where I live. So because this movie takes place in Austin, I was interested in it from the beginning since I saw the trailer, but I also found it interesting how it was this multiverse idea applied to the genre of rom-coms. So let's go ahead and discuss. And starting with my usual question, is Look Both Ways worth watching? I was honestly surprised by this movie, and I think if you like lighthearted and rom-com style movies, it's a nice watch. It might not be a rom-com that you like watch every year or becomes a cult classic of any kind, but for a cozy night in with a loved one, friends or family, or your girlfriends, it is an entertaining watch. However, the main thing I'll say in this section is about if you are a parent or want to be a parent. Not to get personal on here, but I do not like the idea of having children for myself, but I do feel like if you are a parent or want to have children at some point or are pretty sure about it, I wouldn't totally recommend this movie. I just would imagine it's hard to think about if you didn't have your children, what your life would be like, and wondering if it would be better or not. I just feel like if I was a parent or really wanted to have kids, I would have a little bit of an existential crisis watching this movie, but it's hard for me to speak from experience, and maybe if you're a parent, comment below if you liked this movie or didn't. Without giving too much away, it could just make you overthink some things and maybe in not the best way. So I don't really know, but that's just my hunch. So let's go ahead and talk about Look Both Ways. Look Both Ways released on Netflix on August 17th of 2022, and it stars Lili Reinhart. You might know her from Riverdale. She's one of the main characters. She's always reminded me kind of a Brittany Murphy, and it's sad, you know, no one can compare her to Brittany Murphy. I love her, rest in peace. But I've always found Lili Reinhart kind of comforting because I think she looks like Brittany Murphy. There was a moment in time where I didn't like Lili Reinhart because she was dating my soulmate, Cole Sprouse. Yes, I'm aware he's a pretentious asshole. Don't come for me. But they broke up, so I like her again. The two love interests for Lili Reinhart were guys that I had never heard of before. One is Danny Ramirez and the other is David Cornsweet. I don't know them from anything. I think they've been in other stuff, but it's stuff I haven't watched. And then as the main character's best friend is Aisha D, which I do recognize for being one of the main characters of The Bold Type. I subscribe to Mindy Kaling's philosophy of like there's no such thing as a guilty pleasure for TV watching, and it's just a way to make women feel bad about their interest. But The Bold Type was as close as I could get to a guilty pleasure for me. I watched like all of 6 seasons of that show, but it still has a special place in my heart. And then as far as older adults in this movie, we have Andrea Savage, which she did a great job in this movie, and she seems to be very iconic. I just must not have seen whatever she's famous for. And then opposite her is Luke Wilson, which I was happy to see him. And then also Nia Long, which she's also very iconic, but I mostly recognized her from the Are We There Yet movies, which is embarrassing, but I think she was the mom in that. A cool thing about this movie is that it is female directed and written. The director of Look Both Ways is Wanuri Kayu, who is a kind of up-and-coming contemporary African director, which was really cool. The movie did feel like it had that sensitivity to womanhood that seems unique to female directors, or more common with female directors. And the writer was April Prosser. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but I saw an interview with her and she said the movie was kind of based on her real life. She went down one of the paths that the main character goes to and was wondering what her life would have been like if she had gone down a different path. She also grew up in Texas, so that's why the timelines are LA and Texas. And in the movie, the main character wants to be an animator, but in April's life, she wanted to be a writer. And I mean, I guess she's succeeding. She has a movie on Netflix. According to Wikipedia, this movie was originally called Plus Minus, which I think the new name is better. Look Both Ways makes more sense, and I think it captures the theme of the movie a lot better. For the Rotten Tomatoes score, I was kind of surprised, though it is still in flux. I checked it a few days ago and it was at 43% for critics, but now it is up to 58% as I'm recording this, and I don't know if it's going to continue changing. As far as the audience score, it is staying around the 80% range. Big disparity between critics and audiences. I think it's evening out as time goes on, but I definitely agree more with the audience score. The critics are so harsh to this movie, and I just feel like it's the classic case of critics wanting some really artsy kind of film, and that's not really what the point of this type of movie is. It's definitely fitting into that more lighthearted rom-com genre. For the genre, I think it's a well-done movie. Let's discuss the movie itself. Firstly, something I find interesting about this whole idea is the multiverse trend in general in media that we've been seeing this year. If I could summarize the 2022 media trends in 2 words, it would be scammers and multiverses. It feels like any popular media this year involves one or the other. And I don't think it's any secret why these multiverse movies are so popular. Post 2020 is when they've exploded, and it makes sense. In 2022 we're seeing the projects that were written and greenlit like around 2020 and 2021. In a post-COVID world, I think as a society and as a global audience, we are looking to escape our reality. We are dissatisfied with our dystopian existence currently and like the idea of other universes where perhaps things are better. Or even worse, because if they're worse somewhere, then we can feel better about where we're at here. Maybe some of the biggest movies this year, like Doctor Strange, is about multiverse. That's like Marvel's take on multiverses. And of course, Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I did see a critic compare this movie to Everything Everywhere All at Once, and I'm like, these are different leagues. Like, come on, like different weight classes and sports. I don't know. It's apples and oranges. Like, you can't compare a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is meant to be this very deep and philosophical and also chaotic and just very ambitious filmmaking and a lighthearted rom-com type of movie that's trying to push the boundaries of rom-com a bit but not flip cinema on its head. So it's just very different movies, and I think critics get far up their ass on trying to make everything fit this like gold standard. But yeah, I think why we love multiverses is just we hate our reality right now and wish there was a better timeline to cope with our sadness. I mean, all of these multiverse movies, I'm pretty sure, are universes and timelines without COVID. I don't see one person wearing a mask. The general premise of this movie is that our main character, Natalie, has a one-night stand and ends up taking a pregnancy test because she suspects she's pregnant. The movie diverges where she takes the pregnancy test and we see the timeline of if the test is negative and if it's positive. Right off the bat, I think this concept is very interesting in a post-Roe v. Wade overturned world. Like, this past summer in the United States, Roe v. Wade was overturned, which is a Supreme Court case that protects reproductive rights and the right to abortion for citizens of the US on a federal level. I'm not necessarily a politics person, so that's just my citizen understanding of it. It protected a lot, and it was a huge landmark case that was very devastating for anyone who was pro-choice in America. This movie was obviously written and mostly produced before that decision. The overturning of Roe v. Wade was pretty recent. So it's interesting to think about this movie in that context, because although it is, watered down and not focused on abortion at all, you can view it with the lens of these are the 2 timelines that could happen if a woman has a right to an abortion or doesn't. I did think there was a possibility that the timelines would split literally at an abortion clinic. Like, maybe she was at an abortion clinic and was not sure to go through with it or not, and that was where the timeline split. And that would have been pretty radical for the genre. I think it would have been a totally different movie and tone, but I would have enjoyed that. I mean, as someone who is very pro-choice, I'm very pro-choice. And I do feel like the LA timeline where she does not get pregnant is generally more successful for her. I mean, it's very different and success can be defined in a lot of ways. They do try to redeem it at the end where the two timelines feel more equal in the end. And of course, the timeline where she gets pregnant, she has a daughter who she loves, so you can't compare the two. But to me, it did seem like the LA timeline was just more fun and more successful, more free. And of course it is, but also it made getting pregnant and that decision feel like scary. Like it felt for a lot of the movie while she was living it up in LA, the Austin timeline, she was suffering through pregnancy, having issues with co-parenting, having issues with not sleeping and taking care of her daughter, not having a social life. It just feels really real, and I was thinking about how sad it is that a lot of women no longer have the right to choose the freer path, and that's obviously really sad and devastating. And even Lili Reinhart, in an interview I watched, got very heated about this and mentioned that Natalie in the movie had the right to choose, and she chose to have her baby in one of the timelines.
Gets pregnant, but she has, and how wonderful that she has the choice.
I respect Lili Reinhart for being just straightforward and open about it, and even tying this movie to the Roe v. Wade news that is so timely and on our minds. And it's just wild timing that this movie came out right after this landmark case was overturned. It kind of puts a whole new perspective on it. Also in the movie, when she gets pregnant, Gabe is pro-choice and tells her, like, this is your choice and I support. Honestly, I think that's outdated as part of the movie. I'm sure it was way too late to amend that. But especially they were living in Texas, where I live. It was not her choice at that point. But in the movie, she chooses to have it. So it didn't become a big issue to have to explore or rewrite or anything. The setup of it is that Natalie and her good friend Gabe decide to hook up during their finals at UT Austin, which they're graduating from the college I graduated from. I went to UT. I hate to be this person because this isn't a movie about accuracy, but you can't double major in 2D and 3D animation at UT. You can't even major in either. It feels like they can't decide if animation should be a film school thing or a fine arts school thing, and it ends up that both schools have classes for it, but no one has like a robust major or program for it. Anyway, so Natalie in this world can graduate with 2D and 3D animation degrees from UT. It's so funny to see like my own school shown as like graduation night. They show the tower, they show some CGI fireworks on it, and they show this sorority house that she lives at. There's so many buildings that look like this at UT. I try to ask my friends and we weren't sure where it was. We don't even know if it is on UT campus. Also, it wasn't clear in the movie that it was a sorority house at all. I had to find that out on Wikipedia, on the recap they had. So Natalie is at her sorority house celebrating graduation night, but she feels sick, and her friend Kara comes into the bathroom to help her out and gets her a pregnancy test, just in case the one night of sex with Gabe led to pregnancy, even though they use protection. And like I said, this pregnancy test moment is when the timelines diverge, and we see what happens if the test was positive and what happens if it was negative. I'm gonna talk first about the Austin timeline and then the LA timeline. So the Austin timeline is the one where her pregnancy test is positive. After she takes a pregnancy test, Natalie goes outside to find Gabe and breaks it to him. This is where Gabe says he's pro-choice if she wants to terminate or not, and she decides that she wants to have it, but that they don't need to be a couple or anything. Gabe is very supportive. She moves back in with her parents, who are really upset about the pregnancy. The mom especially is so pissed about this. She enjoyed their empty nester life, hates that it's with some rando guy that she does not respect, a wannabe musician. The way I can't relate at all to Natalie in this scenario, because if I moved back in with my mom and told her I was pregnant, the way she would be thrilled about this news and be so excited. Honestly, I'm not going to tell my mom at all about this movie because she's going to be so pissed that it's reinforcing what I always tell her about how having a kid would tie me down too much and I want to be free, like the LA life. So I'm going to keep this one secret from my mom. Luke Wilson plays Natalie's dad, and it's just so funny. Luke Wilson really said, I am not traveling for this movie. In fact, I'm not even leaving my house. My theory is that This house is literally Luke Wilson's actual house in Austin. I'm pretty sure he's from here and lives here. That's why I'm saying that. And the house they live in is just so, it's like every $1 million house in Austin. It looks like this. I liked how true it was to Austin, at least. But at the same time, I enjoy that this movie was kind of more negative propaganda to Austin. Not negative at all necessarily, just like the shittier timeline. Sorry, I'm gonna keep calling the Austin timeline the shittier timeline just because for most of the timeline she is suffering much more than the LA timeline. I appreciated that the shittier timeline was the Austin timeline because so much recently we've been getting positive Austin propaganda and encouraging people to constantly move here, and it's so overcrowded and annoying. And I selfishly want to gatekeep Austin. I've talked about this in other videos, in my 20-somethings video, my Queer Eye video. Those things really promoted Austin as some like cool hip utopia to move to. And I am not having it. And I'm glad this movie went the opposite direction, or at least presented Austin in a neutral light, not as some utopian place to move to. So Natalie has her pregnancy there. She struggles a lot with it. Whether you want children or not, though, you must admit that pregnancy is just unfair to women. And I wish for everyone that wants to have kids that they didn't have to go through such annoying pain to their body and mind for all of that. You know what I mean? Like, this is why celebrities outsource their pregnancies. I was watching this movie with Cameron and he was literally like, this is what pregnancy is like. I'm like, yeah, it sucks. Ah, man, they get to live in blissful ignorance. Another cute nod to being Texan is when Natalie is going to deliver her baby and asked to get Whataburger on the way. Whataburger is like the favorite fast food chain here. I don't eat a lot of fast food, so I don't, oh my god, I just sounded so pretentious saying that. I don't eat a lot of Whataburger, but it is super famous here and I did grow up eating it. So Natalie has her baby and she's struggling with newborn things, the crying, the no sleeping, the pumping. There's a really sad scene where she's pumping while looking at Kara's Instagram having fun in LA because Kara moved to LA in this timeline without Natalie upon her encouragement. And there was a really good conversation here that Natalie has with her own mom about how when you become a mother, you mourn your former self. And I really appreciated this dialogue because, again, whether you have or want kids, you grapple with these ideas of having to lose the person you were before motherhood. And what she says in the movie is, once you're a mother, you are never not a mother after that. I mean, I can't relate to it personally, but it seems so true. And it's a brave conversation to show because it's stigmatized because you're supposed to love your child and feel like it's such a magical experience, and it is in many ways, but also you as a woman have to also grapple with what this means for yourself and your freedom, and it's just part of the process and it should be talked about more. And I saw an interview with Andrea Savage and she said that she informed that scene a bit. I think she's a mother herself and she thought that scene was really important. So eventually in this point, Natalie gets a haircut where her hair is shorter. She's upset because she looks like a mom and it's a little more mature, sure, but she looks great. I mean, Lili Reinhart is like a Hollywood starlet, so she looks good at any hair length. When she got the haircut, it started to become easier to see which timeline was which. In the LA timeline, she has longer hair. It was kind of confusing keeping track of the timeline sometimes. The color correction was a hint. Sometimes the Austin timeline would be a little cooler. I don't know if it's sadder. And the LA timeline was more warm tones. But also, it wasn't that different, so the hair was the biggest clue at a certain point. So eventually, Gabe moves out of Natalie's home. He was there to take care of the first year or so of the baby being born. And he wants Natalie and the baby to move in to his home. But Natalie refuses and is like, I don't want to mess up our co-parenting situation, and I'd rather you just go date and us not be a couple. It's still a good scenario for Natalie in that her daughter's father wants to stick around as much as he does, and he's so committed to Rosie, is the name of the daughter. Even though the pregnancy is the harder journey, it's still a good scenario for Gabe to be around so much and supporting so much. Not everyone is that lucky, sadly. But upon Natalie's advice, Gabe eventually starts dating and gets engaged to a woman named Miranda. The big low point of the Austen timeline is when Natalie goes to LA to visit Kara after like 4 years. But after like a day, Rosie calls her and tells her that she was left with a babysitter that Natalie has never heard of before overnight. Natalie freaks out and goes back home to figure out what's going on, and apparently the babysitter Rosie was left with was Miranda's sister. Miranda and Gabe were getting engaged that night. So Natalie freaks out because although earlier in the movie she had told Gabe to start dating, apparently she was into him the whole time, which that was kind of confusing. I didn't realize that because she kept pushing him so hard. Kind of weird, but Natalie is upset that Gabe is engaged now. And that's a low point. She loses trust in Gabe. She has to leave LA early and ditch her friend. But finally, she starts working on her art again from that struggle and pain that she's feeling. And that's where the timelines start to converge. So let's move to the LA timeline, which when the test turns out negative, they're just like, woohoo, let's party. And it just seems really fun. Natalie and Kara move to LA. The arrival to LA just seems so fun in contrast to the seriousness of the pregnancy timeline. And they're both focused on their careers. Natalie's trying to find a job in animation, and she applies for a job as an assistant to her animation idol, Lucy Galloway. She goes to like a cocktail party trying to see if she can talk to her, and there she meets Jake. They have a flirty relationship. Later on, she finds out that Jake works at the company that Lucy Galloway works at. She ends up getting the job with Lucy Galloway. She gets close to Jake. He gives her a lot of advice in general, and they talk a lot about their dreams. They both bond about loving to plan their lives out. And as far as the two love interests go, Jake is definitely the hotter one. That's another point for the LA timeline. And it's no shade at Gabe, it's just that Jake looks literally like Superman, like a guy that could play Superman. But what is interesting about Natalie having two love interests in this movie is that it's a cool message about soulmates, more like soulmates not existing necessarily, that you could find love and partnership with multiple people in a lifetime. It's not that you have one person meant for you and you were predestined to be together. And I appreciate that message just because it can get dangerous when you start thinking like one person is your end all be all and that you couldn't be happy with another person, because what if that person leaves you or dies, or those are the main things. But it can get dangerous to feel like you have only one person that you can make it work with. So I appreciate that about this movie, that she has interesting and fulfilling relationships with both Gabe and Jake, especially by the end where she ends up with both of them. It's cool that both relationships worked for their own unique timelines. But the LA timeline just seems fun. She's wearing anime shirts to job interviews. She's smoking weed on the balcony, which, oh my god, when they're smoking weed on the balcony and they're being loud, the upstairs neighbor yells at them for being loud and throws a book at them. The book she throws at them is my nightstand book, like the book that's almost a permanent part of my nightstand at this time. When she threw it, I was like, oh my god, it's my nightstand book. In the LA timeline, I feel like obviously it's less mature for Natalie. There's a point where she's complaining about her boss seeing her as an assistant and not an artist, but like she was literally hired to be an assistant at this company and not an artist. So felt kind of like, girl, know your place. You have to climb the ladder slowly at these types of careers. But I like the scene where she's talking to Jake and they're talking about live action remakes, and she had the right take that you should never do a live action remake for the most part. They talked first about Spirited Away, and when he's like, they should make a live action remake of Spirited Away, me and Natalie had the same reaction. We were like, no. The animation discourse on this whole movie felt very informed for the writer being a writer and not an animation person. I will say, I don't believe in live action remakes of animation, but there are exceptions, as they talked about. I don't know about the Ninja Turtles, which is what he talked about, but the one example I can think of a great live action remake is the Scooby-Doo movies. Like, That's good stuff. The low point of the LA timeline is Jake, as they're talking about moving in together, taking their relationship to the next level, he ends up getting a job in Nova Scotia and has to leave, and they have trouble with the long distance and end up breaking up. And around the same time, she shows her portfolio to her boss, Lucy Galloway, and she gives her really harsh critiques about how her work is unoriginal and derivative. Basically, her boss tells her to quit her job to find her voice in art. I mean, it's kind of true, or good art comes from struggle, and I firmly believe that. To make good art, you have to tap into what you've struggled with. Not saying that, like, you have to have a really hard life to make good art. I'm just saying you have to know how to tap into that inspiration that can resonate with people. It made a lot of sense what Lucy Galloway was saying, and Natalie losing her boyfriend and job at the same time, I felt right away that it was going to lead to some good art, and it does. After the low point of both timelines is when they both start to converge. Something I found cute about the timelines thing was that you would see little hints or nods to the other timeline. So like in the Austin timeline, she's FaceTiming with Kara and telling her not to be late for her first day at her job in LA. And in the LA timeline, Kara is running late to her job. So it's like she's just late in both timelines. In the LA timeline, Jake says the first year working at Tall Story is like having a baby. And she's like, also, when Jake says, do you have any kids experience? And he's talking about baby goats, it's kind of like, oh, that kind of. And then in the Austin timeline, there's one point where she sees a movie poster for the movie that Lucy Galloway's working on in the LA timeline. And she tells Rosie, like, oh, you want to go see that? Something about a duck or a goat or something. Also in the Austin timeline, she meets Jake quickly at a juice bar, has flirty banter, and they go their separate ways. I thought this was going to lead to something, but it didn't. But it was cute to see Mom Natalie interact with Jake. Also, something that kind of coincided with the two timelines was where it was raining in both timelines. And I think that was kind of the point where the timeline started getting similar, because it was the low point, it was raining, it was this whole pathetic fallacy thing. I think that's the term for it. And so here we're moving into the climax. I had a lot of wrong predictions at the start of this movie. I mean, the first one being that the diverging timelines would happen at the abortion clinic. I should have known that was too edgy, but that's not what happened. I thought because the first timeline that diverges is the LA timeline, I thought that was going to be our final real one. Like, I thought they were going to choose one timeline to be the real one that happened. They did not. Kara, right when she tests negative, is like, could you imagine if it was not negative? You know, so that's what I thought was my hint, that like, oh, the LA timeline's the real timeline. However, in real life, the writer, for her, the real timeline was the LA timeline.
I grew up in Texas, came to LA to pursue my dream of writing. The character does the same.
Which I think kind of informs why that timeline ends up better, because if you're writing a movie with two timelines and one is the one you did in life and your life is going well, then you're probably going to make that one the better one. So I thought the LA timeline would be real, and after she broke up with Jake, she would go back home to Austin, meet up with Gabe again, rekindle things, and then have a baby with him and have Rosie still. So I thought Rosie could still exist in the LA timeline, just later on in life. That would have, you know, fit in with her 5-year plan. She still got the freedom, but she still got Rosie in the end. I thought it would be too awkward to have Rosie not exist in one timeline. That feels cruel to like a human being. That there's one timeline where you exist and one that where you don't. But they went for it. That's fine. And in the end, they don't choose a real timeline. So all my predictions were wrong as hell. So once the timelines converge, Natalie is using her art to cope with the struggle she's going through in life. In LA, she works on an animated short, and in Austin, she works on a webcomic. For the webcomic, she gets asked to be on a panel for South by Southwest, which is a large film, music, and tech festival that goes on in Austin every year around March, spring break time. I've volunteered quite a bit at South by Southwest in my college years, and it's really fun when you have a pass, but the passes are really expensive. I do wonder what the collaboration or partnership was like with South by Southwest as an organization, because I feel like post-pandemic they've struggled a bit, because obviously huge festivals and conventions are trickier post-pandemic. I don't know how they've been doing since, but it seems like a harder event to pull off. So I wonder if they're trying to, you know, get their name out there again with this movie and this partnership. In the LA timeline, she gets her animated short chosen for a South by Southwest film screening, and in the Austin timeline she's on a panel. She goes to South by Southwest in both timelines. However, the annoying thing about this part is that the LA one cuts her hair and the Austin one has long hair by this point. They switched hairs. For the whole time I've been seeing short hair as Austin, long hair as LA, and now they're flipped. And they're both at South by Southwest. They're both around the same thing, so the timelines do get a little confusing in the climax. So in the Austin one, she does her panel, and on the panel is Lucy Galloway, so she still gets to meet her. And then afterwards she goes to see Gabe play a show covering We Are Young by Fun, which they played We Are Young by Fun 3 times in this movie. And it was a cover every time, and Gabe was in the cover band for it. I'm not sure if it was like they're pretending they made that song or if they're knowingly a cover band. It's unclear. It's a little late for the song. Like, this was literally chosen as my high school senior song for our class. That song brings me back to, you know, graduating high school, which was like 10 years ago for me. But she sees Gabe there and talks to Gabe after playing We Are Young and asks about Miranda, and he's like, we broke up. They go back to the bridge where they initially talked, and they talk again, and she says, oh, I'm in love with you actually, and they kiss and finally get together. And she's like, finally willing to try, which is what he had been saying the whole movie, that they should just try at least. So they end up together and walk off. In the LA timeline, she screens her movie, it's successful. Lucy Galloway tells her to come back to her job basically, or just to see her when she goes back to LA. And Jake shows up. He left his remote job to see her. There might be consequences for it, but decides she's more important than his career. And it's a sweet moment, they get back together and they walk off. So both couples are walking off, and they at the same time pass the sorority house where she took the pregnancy test. She tells the guys to wait and goes in and looks in the mirror, and in the shot we see both of them there, and both of them say, you're okay, to herself, and then leaves with both her love interests in separate directions. When they're looking at themselves in the mirror, I feel like I can tell the blue suit one, which is the mom one, has seen some shit. Like, the LA one looks more naive in her face. I assume that's just Lili Reinhart doing good acting, but I feel like I can tell the jadedness in the mom one. Maybe I'm just projecting. So this was obviously not the ending I expected. I told y'all what I predicted, and I thought they would choose a timeline towards the end, but the overall message of this movie is very cheesy, but at the same time, I found really comforting. As someone with hella anxiety myself, it was sweet to see that both timelines essentially worked out, and that even with major life decisions, you're going to be okay unless you like die or something, which at that point you're dead, you don't care. Sorry, that was morbid. I just like the message of how even after major decisions we find a way to persist and to be okay and to get what we want in life, and we can work towards it even if the paths are very different. Each timeline has its pros and cons and depends on who you are, what you see as the better or worse off one, or if they're both fine. I like that message. I found it very comforting, and Lili Reinhart also mentioned that she liked the project because she was comforted at the end. That's all I have for this video. Let me know what you thought of Look Both Ways in the comments below. I would love to hear about it. Which timeline would you prefer? Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed. I put out new videos once or twice a week about TV, pop culture, internet trends, or other miscellaneous things. And you can follow me at Miscellaneous on Instagram or Twitter to find out about new videos, or just turn on the bell notification here on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.